I want to start this video by asking you all to come back in time with me a little bit. It's the end of the summer and the year is 2010. You're younger, and the new school year is about to begin. As you enter your school hallways for the first time in months, you are greeted with familiarity. Friends, faces, teachers, hallways, food, maybe even smells. But the one thing that was never the same upon returning to school every year were the sounds that would echo around the hallway. During the summertime, everyone would have the time to stock up on their favorite songs and add them to their playlists, and everyone would always be eager to show them to their friends over the summer, tell them what they found. Just to get a feeling of the time period that we're talking about here, some of the most common songs you hear echoing around the hall are Katy Perry's California Girls, DJ Khaled's All I Do Is Win, Eminem's Not Afraid, along with various Kesha tracks. A lot of these songs might sound familiar to you because a lot of them were on the radio for some time, including before the summer even started, so you're probably familiar with a lot of them. There's something that catches your ear, and it involuntarily makes you feel happy, makes you feel ready for the weekend, ready to be a kid. It cuts through the monotony because it's something new, it's something happy, something you haven't been hearing on the radio.
You find out that the sounds you were hearing were coming from a mixtape called Kids by an artist named Mac Miller, and it had only dropped a few weeks ago. A tape by a kid for a kid. This mixtape gave us an innocent look at the life of someone incredibly relatable to all of us. To us, kids embodied all the energy of just that, being young, having no worries, living your best life while not caring about what the world thought. Riding around with your friends, doing delinquent things, all while discovering the wonders in your own backyard. That's what being a kid was all about to Mac. That's all that mattered. And it spoke volumes. With this mixtape, Mac would start his journey to stardom and solidify his name in the music industry. He was a young kid, capturing the energy of being young and riding that to the top. Mac Miller painted a picture of childhood optimism that many could, but nobody else ever did. And everybody loved it. Everybody wanted more Mac. However, when you create a piece of art that speaks to such a large portion of the youth, to kids all over America, maybe even all over the world, there are upsides and downsides to having impacted so many lives so early on. And a lesson that we all had to learn, no matter how bittersweet, was that sometimes you can only maintain childlike optimism for so long, and everybody has to grow up, eventually.
I think it's important that for the rest of this video, we attempt to put ourselves into Mac's shoes. He is 18, riding a wave of fame, and thinks he has it all figured out. Understandably on a high from the release of Kids generating such a huge buzz, he held on to his youthful energy and optimism, and channeled it into his follow-up single Donald Trump, which because of the energy, spotlight on his name, and relevancy in lyrics, even today, was an absolute hit. And all the hype followed him into his next mixtape, appropriately titled Best Day Ever. Upon release of this mixtape, it was eaten up by fans who wanted more of Mac's youthful perspective on life, and that's just what they got. It took fans who had related to Mac so much down a path of good feelings, youthful nostalgia, positive emotion, and hopeful mindsets. Except there was a little more maturity in his lyrics this time around. Even though Mac suddenly came into fame and money, the tape was a comfortable reminder of what grounds us as we grow. Speaking about his family and going in depth about his feelings, particularly the ones he had since his breakthrough into music just as he graduated high school. It looked to be another great tape by the beloved hero of early suburban rap, and would put even further hype around his anticipated studio album release. But perhaps the most memorable thing about this tape was the way Mac went about describing his feelings.
it up and follow on my journey as I live my dream. All natural whole foods that lay you back, have you straight chilling in a dope mood. And some shit is happy like a show tune. This a brand new world I can show you.
It was almost like having a friend you've known forever, but you are just going to their house for the first time. A youthful feeling of awe and newness that was perhaps behind some of his older listeners and biggest critics. But it was grounding and realistic to fans in his own age bracket and below. It really brought these fans further into his perspective, roping them in even more. This unique ability to make fans feel less like fans and more like friends is something that Mac, as young as he was, seemed to do without any effort at all, by just being himself. It was easy to put yourself into his shoes. Artists strive for this, and many try for years to establish this rapport with their fans. And Mac had this uncanny ability to thank for him cultivating one of the most loyal and supportive fan bases in all of suburban hip-hop as soon as he started his career. Mac then released the On and On EP, which consisted of a few re-releases of older songs, as well as some new songs, that all kind of encapsulated the same message.
In a nutshell, it was, yeah, I'm young, I'm doing me. I feel the bad vibes out there, but I can't let it get to me. I need to live free, and I need to go on and on. Let's take a listen.
Hating's what they do, but you gotta keep a smile. Stay up on your move, live free, 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 live free. They gon' try and tell you no, shatter all your dreams, but you gotta get up, go to bigger, better things. Live free, 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 live free.
This EP is important because it officially showed the loyalty of Mac's fan base. When I say officially, it's because it was the first paid release of Mac's content, and it debuted within the top 20 of the US rap and R&B charts. There were hints in this EP that Mac was feeling some negativity coming from his critics, and it was affecting him. Enough so that he felt the need to address it at large in this EP. Keeping to his optimistic roots pleased his fans, and this EP was relatively well received because of that. The hype around Mac's name following all of these releases was enormous. But it started to become slightly obvious in his music that Mac was trying to deal with growing up on top of acquiring a sudden mountain of fame and fortune. And on the smallest of levels, this started to distance Mac from his fan base that related to him so much. Because this was a situation that none of us would ever really have to deal with. Growing up alone was an adventure enough, let alone having the public eye on your every move. This was something that we couldn't relate to. Even for us, the fans who walked in his shoes so easily through his music, this was not an easy situation to envision. And this was perhaps the first glimpse into a reality that, if you really thought about it, was a little scary. Regardless, you could tell Mac was having fun, and it would appear that he wasn't going to stop, that he wasn't going to let anybody slow him down, and he didn't care about what anybody thought. But Mac already hinted at feeling hate towards his music, enough so that he felt the need to put it into an EP. And he was a huge target because he was young, successful, and in the spotlight. And dealing with emotions and opinions is something that we all must go through while growing up. Mac was on this adventure with us, and at his young age, was starting to have to deal with these on a real-life, complex scale, in large. And he was taking it in stride. Or so we thought. His studio album would without a doubt have the attention of everybody in the industry, and Mac would have to deal with that as well, for better or for worse.
So let's take a second to recap what we've established here. In just a few short months, Mac Miller had essentially taken the music world by storm, connected with millions of people across the globe, and cultivated an incredibly loyal fan base. He did all of this through just mixtapes alone, not including a couple new songs on the On and On EP. Mac knew all eyes were on him at this point, but perhaps in his mind, he did all of this by just having fun and being himself. Mac had attached himself to his music. This much was apparent even from the first track of the Kids mixtape, that has the audio samples saying that music is everything to him. Take that away, and he's got nothing. So, If he did this himself by just being himself, imagine what he could accomplish in his mind if he truly applied himself to his music. Maybe he held out hope that if that were the case, he could do nothing wrong. But things aren't always as they seem.
It's November 2011, and Blue Slide Park is slotted for release. Mac has been all over the country on radio shows, promoting his album on Twitter, online, doing listening parties, everything he can to promote his album. And even if he didn't, the whole world would be waiting on bated breath for it. And they were. The album dropped and went #1 for an independent artist. That was huge. There had been no #1 independent albums in decades, and this set the tone for many rappers to follow in Mac's footsteps, many artists in general to follow in Mac's footsteps. And he was a pioneer in this aspect. But let's not forget that Mac poured his heart and soul into this album. He truly applied himself. And when the album released, it was, in terms of reviews, largely a mixed bag. Now, many albums that come out and are subject to criticism often receive mixed reviews. There are always going to be people questioning an artist's motives or techniques or what have you. But we cannot forget that Mac attached himself to his music. It was a personal thing for him. And for Mac, with him truly applying himself to this album, when he releases it and sees things like Pitchfork giving him a 1.0 and calling him a bland Wiz Khalifa and nothing unique about him, essentially being just the same as everyone else with nothing else special, this affected Mac in a huge way. For someone trying to find themselves when they're growing up and attaching themselves to a medium that they create, to have that medium criticized on a large scale and have the entire public, or at least a large portion of it, agree, is psychologically impactful to somebody who is trying to go through this. This is why it is very important for us to try to put ourselves into Mac's shoes. Mac was already struggling with trying to deal with the hate and the criticism that he was receiving while trying to find himself, while simultaneously differentiate himself from a pack of other artist personas. Blue Slide Park, upon listening, was Mac holding on to his childlike optimism, even though it was more obvious than ever that he was struggling with this. He wanted to go back to before the public eye was on him. He wanted to go back to before the spotlight was burning him. On the very first track that sets the tone for the rest of the album, he says he's trying to keep his sameness. He's trying to maintain his brain. Everyone's trying to change the color of who he is, of his blue slide, seemingly representing his childhood and where he came from. He says, sometimes I just want to go back to Blue Slide Park, the place I call home. I hope it's never all gone. When you attach your very personality to your music, like Mac did, you attach yourself, your success, to you just being yourself. What do you do when that's suddenly not good enough? Mac suddenly found himself in a point in his life where the thought of, quote-unquote, your music isn't good, that he was struggling with in his own mind, is now front-page news. Understandably, one of his greatest nightmares has materialized itself into reality in front of his very eyes. What do you do when all you've ever known, all that you are, is not good enough anymore? Mac said in one of his interviews shortly after album release that he had to stop caring about what people thought, that he had to make what he really wanted to make. But with the scars left behind for him after all of this trauma that he went through after the release of Blue Slide Park, trying to leave your childlike optimism behind, when you attached your childlike optimism to who you were as a person, this inevitably leads to self-destructive behavior. Leaving all of it behind, all of your old music behind, and in a sense, all of your old self behind, leaves you in a floating space. So, what happened to Mac Miller after the release of Blue Slide Park? Well, in a nutshell, he grew up. He grew up not in a way that he had envisioned, but he grew up because he had to. In Mac's next mixtape release, titled Macadelic, there are stark differences between the Mac of Kids and the Mac of this mixtape.
I got so much on my damn mind. So if I add some more stress, I just don't see how I'ma cope. I think they underestimate the grind I do to bring this dough, and I'm only 20 years old. I wonder why I said this devil juice, cause it feel incredible. Problems I got several, thank God that none of that made it go. I've been blessed with much to be expected. What am I doing here?
Where we used to have childlike optimism, we found lingering pessimism. Where youthful perspective once was, we found Mac questioning why at every corner of his life, every turn. And the feel-good songs that we used to know ended up turning into highly descriptive experiments with drugs and dark days. Mac's feel-good style seemed to be gone. It seemed to be no more. The result of Mac having to deal with high amounts of personal trauma due to him attaching himself to his music, and that suddenly not hitting the bar anymore, turned Mac's feel-good style into a much darker style of music.
There are a lot of dark lines in this mixtape, such as in Desperado, when he says, "It's sad to see that everything that you believe is dead." And in 1 through 8, what does it mean to be a sensation? Do you have to be sensational? Mac was obviously struggling a lot at this point with a lot of the feelings that he had had in the past, everything that had happened to him, and what he was going through at the present time with, women or drugs or whatever it might be. Mac had essentially created a dark cloud, and he had immersed himself in it. He became this darkness. He became this raw energy. This dark cloud would follow him through many of his following works. And many of his avid listeners that loved Mac for his youthful perspective and for his optimism splintered, saying that the old Mac is dead, and created the very large community today that only likes Mac's old music. But there are a lot of questions to be raised here, and there are a lot of points to take away from Mac's journey. If you listen to Mac's albums chronologically from Kids through Good AM, you will know that Mac's ability to capture his emotions in his music never changed. If anything, it improved. And if you listen to his chronology, to his discography, to everything in order, you will find yourself in an incredibly descriptive journey of an emotional path that a child takes growing up and trying to fit into the mold of a sensation. Did Mac take the right path? Would you have dealt with this in a way different than what Mac did, or how Mac did? Are you a Mac fan? Did you follow Mac through this? Are you still with him today? Are you still one of those fans that became friends? There are many more relevant questions that should be raised about Mac and his journey that he's taken. So I'm going to make a follow-up video to this, highlighting some of these questions and allowing you guys the opportunity to discuss it more. But if you like this video, if you're a fan of Mac and you're ready to listen to his new album that comes out tomorrow, give this video a like and be sure to subscribe, because I'm going to be putting out much more content about the genealogy of pop culture in general. So, until next time, examining the why of music, this, my friends, is the Damage Report.